You want to see you say something.
Hey.
And there's pressure.
You know, when are we online, Sarah, and broadcasting? Great. Okay. And this looks like it's on. Perfect. So hi, everybody. Welcome this morning. We have a few people that might come in a little late, but let's go ahead and get started since most of us are here. Thanks everyone for coming back. I think we all introduced ourselves last time. So Sarah, were you here last time? Okay. Was there anyone at the table who wasn't here last time that wants to introduce themselves? Looks like familiar faces. Great. Okay. So we're just gonna take a look at the purpose and goal and some of our ground rules before we get into the discussion. Council is here. Councilor Campbell, unfortunately could not be here, wanted me to express she really wanted to, and she will watch the video back. Just couldn't make it today. But council is here to listen to our representatives of the community here and really have a discussion. We want people to participate. There are bathrooms out in the hallway. Take a break if you need to. We've got coffee and water over here. We have limited amounts of microphones around the table, and we've heard from our watchers online that it's hard to hear sometimes. I've got this mic on me because I'm speaking a lot, but otherwise let's pass the mics to the person who's going to speak so that we make sure that everyone online can hear us and speak up and into the microphone. And then, yeah, I think we're going to just go ahead and get into it. Let's do it. So this is just a little bit of a recap of our last roundtable, some of the things we heard from everybody, this multimodal approach and transforming our transportation system, safer routes, better maintenance and operations. We took to heart a lot of the communications about how to message and communicate with the community about this and how to give some more detailed information. So some of that we're going to provide today to you all, and we would love to hear what you think about that. Yep. And so just to sort of get into it, these are some of the key questions, and we will come back to this a little bit later, but these are some of the key questions that we want to focus on answering for the community that have sort of been synthesized out of your feedback and feedback we're getting on email and things like that. And so a lot of what we are working on is how to answer these questions and how to provide additional information for people who want it. So you want to go ahead, Sarah? Thanks.
Yeah, I could just quickly go over the agenda. So it's mostly what we shared in advance of the meeting. Although in the agenda that we shared in advance, it had us ending just a little bit early, and we think we might be able to fill the whole time. So just wanted to give folks a heads up. We're still following that same order, but as Councilor Keebler alluded to, we will kind of discuss key questions and messages and try to get that feedback as well, just to make sure we're kind of hitting it right based on what you're hearing from community members. So that's kind of added in there. And we think the discussion around uses of transportation fee funds and discussion might take closer to 45 minutes. I think originally we said 35. So just want to give folks a heads up, but we will still have a break in the middle as well. So just want to let folks know what to expect.
Yeah, so we'll move through all this. We'll get a little bit of information about our assistance program as well. And then also we are going to talk about that non-residential plan and just want to get some high level, again, input from this group as well. And then just a reminder, we are meeting again in October, and we're going to touch on more about equity and also accountability for this funding, and then future other funding tools for transportation. So keep that in mind that we will have another opportunity to meet on that. Okay, let's get into the financials.
Hi, good morning. I'm Samantha Nelson. I'm the Director of Finance for the City of Bend, and I was asked to present to you some information regarding mid-sized cities that are similar to us in size in order to answer some questions that were posed at the last meeting. So this first slide is showing you from a tax perspective in regards to 7 other cities in the state of Oregon that are similar size to Bend. In Bend, we have the local option levy for the fire. That was a 20 cents per thousand on assessed value that was implemented in 2014. As we all know, that was increased and voted in to continue, but it will be at 76 cents per thousand beginning in 2024. At a similar city is the city of Hillsborough. They have a similar type fee or levy, but they use theirs for police, fire, and parks. It is at $1.72 per $1,000 of assessed value. Additionally, the city of Eugene, they have what they call a community safety payroll tax. So this is a little different than, it's not based on assessed value. This is something that is reported and managed by the city of Eugene. Folks submit information regarding their pay, and it's a sliding scale depending on a select number of criteria. There's exemptions, there's a whole host of different parameters around their program, but it's anywhere from 0.0021 cents per dollar up to 0.0044. So again, just another avenue for them to fund their public safety. Additionally, in Eugene, they do have a local gas tax that they passed in 2003. This is 5 cents per gallon within their community as well, and it goes directly to the city of Eugene for their transportation. Washington County includes the city of Beaverton and Hillsborough. They have something a little bit unique. They receive a portion of a $30 vehicle registration fee for vehicles that are registered within Washington County. Those funds are distributed on a 60-40 split. So 60% of that $30 per registration fee is retained by Washington County for transportation. The remaining 40% or $12 is split among all of the cities that exist within Washington County on a per capita basis. So per population is how that's split.
And I just want to point out, folks, we have in front of you this printed out. So I know this is kind of small type, but you can also look on this with this and the next slide are on a printout. And Samantha, can you just make sure the mic is like really
sorry.
close to you?
Yes,
Thanks.
of course. Sorry, I do tend to talk a little quiet. Okay, this next slide is looking at fees. So another avenue to generate revenue is to use fees. Typically, these fees are, again, for a dedicated purpose. All of these fees that we're showing here are related to are presented to citizens on a utility bill. There are additional fees that some of these cities charge in different ways, but these are the primary ones that we were able to locate. So the first one is if we look at the city of Gresham, for example. City of Gresham has a fee that they instituted in 2012. It is specific to their parks and police. 95% of it is dedicated toward police, and the remaining 5% is dedicated to parks. It originally is a $15 per month fee to on the utility bill. However, they have done an temporary increase to $30 currently. City of Hillsborough, they have a utility fee specific to transportation as well as community services. They have a $9.11 fee on their utility bill for single family residential. Again, like many of these that you'll see, they have a different scale depending on the type of use of the facility that is receiving that utility bill. So commercial use, multifamily, any of those kind of things, there is a different fee structure, but we wanted to have something for comparison. So we focused on the single family residential. They also, in the city of Hillsborough, have this community service fee. So this is a $13.50, again, on that scale for single family residential. But this is unique in the city of Hillsborough that it is for a particular zip code within their city. So they have a particular project, I believe it's around their parks system, that is for a particular area. It's the South Hillsborough area. So only the folks who live within that residential area are actually subject to that fee. City of Medford, they have several different fees on their utility bill. One of them is the public safety fee, as you'll see here, a little over $12. Sorry, I can't see that. Park and Rec, they have a per month fee as well, a little over $5. They have a transportation fee that is 0.73 per trip for residential and 0.54 for commercial. This is based on using the traffic engineering traffic generator manual. So it's based on a trip. So when they identify the property, they identify the kind of use that it has. They designate it, they go back to the manual and they do the calculation to assess that fee to that facility or that utility bill recipient. They also have a streetlight fee. So they have a $2 per month streetlight fee that is just a flat fee on all of their utility bills and is specifically dedicated to maintaining their streetlights within their community. And the final one is the city of Salem. So city of Salem, I have to get my note. So they have a $14.43 single family residential home per month. Now theirs goes into their general fund. So because of that, it is specific for emergency services, library, park, and other essential services. So it does have a little broader scope of use within the city of Salem. They also have a streetlight fee as well. However, their fee is $2.80 per single family residential, but again, has that sliding scale depending on the type of facility. The next question that was asked was about the total tax rates assessed in a jurisdiction. So this would be what somebody who receives a tax bill in November would see. So we broke this up. The one at the top is Beaverton. They have the highest tax rate. So this is including when we talk about total tax rate, we're looking at all of the taxes that are imposed by all of the government entities within that area, as well as any of the school taxes that are imposed as well. This includes everything from the permanent rates, any type of operational levy, any type of general obligation bond for like construction, or any other special district, library, water utility, any of the community colleges, any of those kind of things are included in those totals. So you'll see here, Bend is second from the lowest in regards to our overlapping or total tax rate. The chart below breaks this out between government and schools. The reason we show the Measure 5 information is to show that when we talk about tax rates that are imposed on homes and businesses, we are capped by Oregon law. So Measure 5 is a constitutional tax limit that says government entities as a group can only charge $10 per $1,000 of real market value. If you exceed that, a thing happens called compression. So compression then requires everybody to reduce until we get to that $10 limit. So you may impose a higher fee, but you do have to reduce it in order to get to that $10 cap. Same thing applies for education districts as well. The exemption to that is for certain, typically a GO bond that's for construction. Those will be exempt from that compression requirement. So when you look at some of these under the government totals, where you'll see Beaverton, for example, their total tax rate is over $20, but the government is only $12.18 of that, and school entities are $8.66. They are both over the cap. So they either have a compression issue or they have construction bond, general obligation bonds of some type, or a tax levy that's being imposed. So again, if you get down to look at Bend, and you can look at the difference on how we are split out compared to our comparable cities as well. In this particular chart, we pulled Redmond in as well, simply because of relational, because they're in our area. And so you'll see that Bend is at 847. So we're toward the bottom for the rates. Okay, so the next thing we looked at was in regards to population and assessed value growth. So again, assessed value is what our taxes are based on. It is capped by Measure 50. Measure 50 says that tax rates in any given year on an existing property cannot exceed 3% growth. So we do have a limit on how much an existing property can grow in assessed value. Real market value can be much higher, but assessed value is going to stay at maximum 3%. So we compared the growth of 2020 to 2022 of the city of Bend as we grow. And we also looked at that assessed value. Do we have more properties? Are we growing more than 3%? If we are, that typically would indicate new construction, new growth, new development. Both of those factors relate to a greater demand on our systems from our citizens in our community. So if we have more people, we have more construction, that means we're going to need more streets to move folks around. And so our last slide is kind of comparing all of that information we had in the previous one. So we're looking at the city square miles and the city mileage. So when we talk about city miles, I was looking for a report that I could get from the state level that would have a consistent measurement for the when you're measuring miles. There's different ways you can measure miles, and Russ could probably speak to this much more defined than I can. So I'll try to be as clear as I can. Center line miles are basically any through lane of through traffic. So it's a road. Doesn't matter if there's 4 lanes of traffic on that road or 1, it's still considered 1 center line mile. So typically we talk about lane miles because when we talk about maintaining streets, we're not talking about maintaining a single lane. We're talking if it has 4 lanes, we're maintaining 4 lanes, not just a single lane. So that explains why we have centerline miles on here, because there's a 2021 Oregon mileage report that measures by that centerline mile. So again, just how many thoroughfares do we have within our community compared to other similar sized cities? We looked at that in relation to city square miles, the intent being, are we in line with where we are looking at neighboring folks? And then we put population there again at the bottom. Again, all of those factors to indicate our demand on our systems. Okay, so what does this mean? Again, to sum it all up, with Measure 5 and 50, we're limited in what we can do in regards to tax to fund the growing demands on our city system. So we are having cities across the state are having to evaluate alternative fee structures, such as a TUF, in order to meet the needs of our growing communities. In comparison to other cities, again, we wanted to verify where we are for the city of Bend comparatively. We have the 2nd lowest tax rate at $15.85 compared to our mid-sized cities. We are the 5th largest in population, but we're growing the fastest. We're the 3rd largest in square miles. So we have a lot of space that we need to move folks around in. And we have an increasing residential and commercial development. We grew at 11% in 2 years. So again, just indicating that need to meet the demands of what's being imposed on our city. I have for you today.
Thank you, Samantha. So we wanted to take some time here for any questions about what you've just seen. We can go back and look at the slides if you want to refer to something. But we're hoping this is some of the information that folks were looking for just to help us compare to peer cities and explain why we have an increased need and not enough funds currently to meet that need. So does anyone have questions or about the slides that Samantha presented or the information that we've given? Does this make sense? Is there anything that didn't make sense? Yeah, Councilor Mendez.
A question about the center lane miles slide. Does the result look any different if we look at lane miles instead of center lane miles? Because we plow lane miles, we pave lane miles. Just wondering about the center line miles, excuse me.
Yeah, and I'll try to answer that. I may turn to David too. So when you think about it, we have close to 900 lane miles, and David references this all the time. So when you think of center line miles, just a 2-lane road, you would take the center line miles, multiply times 2, and we're getting pretty close on average. We don't have an apples to apples comparison of lane miles with other cities. I know Samantha looked up, down, and in every closet she could find to try to find it, but we couldn't get there. So we do think, knowing what our total lane mileage is, this is a pretty good comparison.
Thank you. And this is a tremendous amount of research, and I really appreciate it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, Samantha did a lot of work here trying to pull all this data together.
Any other questions about the tech? Okay, and so Mark, if you can pass a mic down to Mark so he can. Thank you.
Thanks. That was a great presentation. Just a quick clarifying question. The 1585 tax rate for Bend, that does include Bend Parks? Or it does not?
Yes, as a total rate, that would include.
It does include Bend Parks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, Joanne.
Joanne Mina with the Human Rights and Equity Commission. Salem just started a payroll tax that is 0.814, or they will be next year. And just wanting to get a little nuance on what is the scope that we could cover with a tax versus a fee?
Yeah, Salem is their council voted in a payroll tax. It is being referred to the voters to remove it this fall. So we'll see if it holds, but they are hiring staff, if it withstands that recall, they would be hiring staff and working with the State Department of Revenue to collect that payroll tax that would get assessed through somebody's paycheck. I don't have all the details. I don't know if Samantha does on the payroll tax and what the charge is. I mean, similar to Eugene, what we shared, Eugene has a payroll tax. Their intent is to really focus it in filling gaps in their general fund. They've got some significant budget shortfalls where they'll have to most likely eliminate staff if they don't get this payroll tax. So I know they're kind of been talking with other mid-sized cities about the need for tax reform. I think we all are dealing with this effect of measures 5 and 50 and really need better tools because the tools that we try to impose are somewhat fraught. And as they're learning in Salem, the community is not happy with it. And they're concerned that tax that the council voted in is going to be taken away.
And I think this is a good thing we can maybe touch on when we talk at our next meeting about other funding mechanisms and sort of the differences in other things that the funding group at the TSP talked about. But yeah, I think there's a larger this is showing you there's a larger conversation about property taxes and city funding that I think is coming back up again across the state as cities struggle with their budgets. So that's definitely the context that we're in.
One follow-up, just that why it seems interesting to consider some sort of payroll tax or deduction is because it allows us to really look at our economic disparity and address it directly at the source.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Elizabeth Oshel with the City Attorney's Office. Just, Joanne, I heard at the end of your first question, a slight reference to what's the difference between a tax and a fee. And so there's property taxes that have been addressed on here that are assessed at a particular rate that are limited by measures 5 and 50 that are against owners of property. Taxes, there's also the payroll tax that you mentioned. Taxes go into the general fund of a particular city or an entity and can be used for any government service. Fees, so on those first couple charts, are assessed for users of a specific service. So there's a distinction there between what's a tax and what's a fee, and then what's the property taxes are what's limited by 5 and 50. There's a lot more nuance there, but
Yeah, good clarification. Any other questions, Councilor Riley? Make sure you have a mic.
Is this good enough?
That's perfect.
Okay. So for the city of Medford and the transportation street fee that they have, 0.73 per trip, how does that work? Is it estimated on single family residential homes projected to do this number of trips in a year? So we multiply the number of trips times that dollar value to get a fee, or what do they get out of it?
Yeah, the research that I showed, they use that particular traffic route generation manual. And so they reference that as the base for their calculation. So they identify the utility bill recipients, what kind of commercial use it is, and then they categorize it per that manual and then apply that amount. And so it is a flat calculation, and then they charge that on their utility bill.
And that comes from the IT, the same place the SDC data and
Correct.
basis for SDCs.
Other questions? Okay, James, please.
James DeRofi. I just have a clarification on the center line mile. Is that all public streets? Is that public and private? I'm asking this, I'm trying to determine maintenance responsibility of like a HOA with private streets versus public streets.
My assumption is that's the public streets that public entities are required to maintain for purposes of this comparison, right? The data that Samantha got.
Do we
Right,
know
Samantha?
how much extra lane miles there are that are considered private streets in Bend?
Do not. Hi, everybody. David Abbas, Transportation Mobility Director. Good to see you again. Yeah, the 422 up there for us is the public center line miles that the city is responsible for maintaining. The private roads in town, I do not have a good number on how many center line miles
Okay.
there are that.
Thanks.
And can we confirm in our TSP, we've moved away from private roads and new developments, and we're asking everything to be public roads now.
We have, and the reason for that is a lot of times, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, we start getting calls from HOA saying, can you take over our streets? And they're at substandard. They're kind of substandard for what the city would accept. Also, I just want to make sure when we talk about private streets, that is an elective decision that the developers are making for those communities. We are not forcing any entity to in the past to make private streets. That was a choice made by them. But also remember that even if you have a private street, you are using the public system to get around. And that's really what we're trying to address here. Again, the city does not dictate whether or not a community should have private streets. We actually try to make everyone move towards public streets, and we've done that now through our code.
I understand.
Yeah, just want to clarify it. Okay, we've got a question down here from Will.
Yeah, I mean, this presentation was phenomenal. I think, would it be useful to have like a closing slide that captures like a median, like a persona of someone in Bend, and actually put all the numbers into, median household, just to help. Because I think for a lot of people, you have to hold a lot of numbers in your head and know like assessed value, that sort of thing. So if we just did Redmond, or, pick 3 cities, Bend included, and had like, here's a family that's gonna, has a house of 400,000. This is how much they're going to be paying. That would probably be helpful. Not to add more work.
No, I think it's a good idea to sort of shrink it down to personal level. Right?
Yeah, and it just helps like wrap up the like the work that's been done and say, this is the actual, total number that we're looking for. And of course, be great if everybody could have a little widget that they could put in and calculate, but yeah.
One talking point that and I know the mayor has shared this as well, and other councilors have, is that just looking at Redmond. So if we had the same tax rate in Bend that Redmond has, we would, as a city, be receiving about $12 to $13 million more in revenue per year.
So
another
there
way
was
to
a
distill
point
it.
in time when tax levels were sort of frozen, and it was fairly arbitrary, and it's not necessarily matched to how much we're growing or how much our population is impact on our systems. Okay, we've got another presentation from David and Russ about sort of, I just want to say we're ready to move to that, but we have one more question from you, Elisa, and then let's move to that one. Can we, Pat, you got a mic? Great.
Yep. I was just wondering if it was possible for this fee to make it income based instead of a flat rate, or is it not possible because it's just assessed on utilities?
I think to Elizabeth's point, a fee has to go towards users of the system and be based. I think a lot of what the background work that Sarah did to get us to this fee was based on that trip data, right? And that's going to be what we're talking about on the non-residential side too. So I don't think so. I think if we went to income based, we would be looking at something maybe the voters would need to approve instead of a fee.
Well, it depends again if it's going to be a fee or a tax, but I think the correlation between income and use of the system, we've been looking at what are those, right? You have to take, is there the data to support a grade a different scale? So what's the impact of the use on the system? And I don't think we've looked at whether there's an impact, as well as a correlation between income and use of the system or impact on the system. And then there's also the questions of implementation. And if that is going to be an entirely new financial system for the city, then that takes a lot of revenue, right, to implement and administer. So those are some of the considerations.
But I was going to say, we'll get to on the income side later on in the presentation today. We'll talk about a proposed low income assistance program. So assessing that fee, but then eligibility requirements for people to be eligible to have a reduction in that fee as well.
Okay, great. One more question down here.
I
Grab a
don't have
mic, please.
but
Oh, hold on, we'll pass you one.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Kevin Perkey, representing BDAB. Just really quick, I forgive me if I missed this. Did you share anything on how you mentioned, we've talked about use a few times, we've thrown that word around, the modeling that you're using for current and future use for both residential and or commercial, and that might be in the weeds and you could send it as a follow-up, but.
And I'll try to keep it as high level as I can. So we use what's called a transportation demand model that we work with ODOT on, which is the basis for all of our transportation system modeling. So when you talk about what we're doing around growth management, our transportation system plan, UGB expansions, it's all based off of this kind of macro model for kind of not only a city, but also the kind of the Central Oregon area. And that's where we can kind of get a good understanding of what trips are being generated by residential areas, what trips are being generated by non-residential areas. And it is consistent with all of our other planning documents that we use kind of up and down for various reasons.
I wonder, I'm thinking, Will, to your question, I wonder, is there a profile you can create? Is, you know, like the average family, this is what our residential use looks like as a.
We have, there's multiple data points in terms of what is a single family house generate in terms of traffic, what is apartments, what do different types of housing types, what do different types of non-residential. So we have all that. And you can use it at kind of a trips per acre down to a trips per square foot, depending on what you're trying to do. When we're looking at the entire system, we kind of look at, okay, kind of how many units do we think we're going to get there, or how much industrial acreage do we have? And then when you get down to more specific intersection design and kind of street design and impacts, you're looking at what exactly is that building doing to the system and what's going on inside the building.
Cool, thanks.
Great. Okay, let's, and again, there's a lot of information. We're all sitting here at a table. If something comes to you later, please, send it to Sarah, send it to us if you have other inputs or questions about what you've just seen. And of course, for everyone watching as well. So let's move into a presentation now about kind of uses of transportation fee funds. This is building off of that survey that kind of we took and talked through about kind of ranking some of our values around the transportation system, and then talking about what this fee would be used for and how we would continue to enhance what we're doing.
All right, so good morning again, everybody. I'm Russ Grace. I'm the Chief Operations Officer. So I'm going to kind of talk at the high level about kind of what we're trying to sync up between our values and what we're looking at in terms of where the fee revenue may be spent. And then I'm going to turn it over to David Abbas, who is the Director of our Transportation and Mobility Department, who will get into more of the specifics on kind of what this means in terms of activities on the ground and what he would like to do within his department to help kind of solve some of these questions. So this community value list came out of the last stakeholder meeting, or the last roundtable. He went through that exercise and kind of ranked these in terms of priorities. So a lot of it is how do we move people, always at the top of the list is how do we move people effectively around the system, both in terms of options and also safety. Then we move into the kind of more of the operation sides. How are we maintaining the systems that we have? And you can see the other things as we move down around congestion and then kind of enhanced street quality and micromobility options. So what we're going to do here is kind of go over a high level budget. So I know we're getting questions about where is this money going to? And this is an example of where we would place those budget items. What would normally happen, and that's why we didn't want to get very specific of saying we're going to put 5 or 6 million here and 1.5 million here, is this is going to change year to year based off of what the needs are on the system and policy direction that we get from council as we develop the budgets. But this really we're kind of using the consumer reports dollar signs as an indicator of where we think the majority of the money would go. And David's going to go into more specifics about what this all means. But what we asked David and his team to do is, hey, if we do move forward with a $15 million fee, where are your priorities from your perspective on what you would see on the system? So at the highest level, obviously, it would be going into the majority of the money would be going to the street preservation, which is how do we maintain the asphalt and concrete that we have on the streets? And David's going to give a little bit more explanation on that. Then we would also be making sure that we are already getting additional equipment to handle a lot of this multimodal maintenance, but we also need staff to run that. So the best example that I've been using in conversations with everybody is right now we have a big sweeper that can do the lanes, the driving lanes, and we now also we're getting little sweepers that can do bike paths and other things. But with our current staff, we need to have our personnel in the big sweeper stop, park that machine, get out of it and get into the little sweeper and do the little, and then go use that somewhere. What we'd like to have is both of those pieces of equipment always moving at the same time. That's where we're looking for additional staff. David's also going to talk around additional kind of concrete crews and other staff. That is, again, just to increase our capacity. So we would be looking at, again, street preservation. How do we maintain that system from a multimodal perspective? That's really where a lot of the priority needs to be. And we understand we agree that's where we have a little bit of a lack of service just because of capacity right now. We want to make sure that we also can expand, and David will also elaborate on this, our year-round maintenance. So we want to make sure not only maintaining these systems in the summer, but also in the winter. And there's some synergies when we have additional staff, how we can pivot to winter operations really quickly around that. Another example I will use is when we get into winter ops is around street plowing. So right now, what we do is we put all the crews into the plows to move the snow off the roads. That gathers into sidewalks, roundabouts, crosswalks, all that. So after we do the plowing, then that staff comes back and it starts working on clearing out the sidewalk ramps and things like that. Same example, we'd like to be running both operations at the same time. We're running the plows and we're running staff shoveling out crosswalks and driveways and bridges and things like that. And then we move into safety and additional capital through our safety programs, looking at safe routes to schools, and David will elaborate on this as well. And where can we start to fill in the sidewalk gaps a little bit more? Again, this is just adding we're doing some of this work now, which David will explain, but it's really about adding additional capacity and doing more with these additional funds. Then we also have some programmatic things that we need to do through data collection and our asset management system to make sure that we're well coordinated in what we're prioritizing in terms of what we're looking at building and maintaining, but also making sure we're assimilating all the data to make sure that we're also targeting the right projects with everything going on in town. I'm going to have David go through that as well. Then this is just trying to line up kind of where our lining those priorities up with the value statement. So you kind of see we're a lot of these, we're hitting multiple values in terms of how we move through this. Not going to spend a lot of time here, but we just want to demonstrate that we're doing that. We can come back to this after I turn this over to David, and he'll give you more kind of tangible examples of what this all means. And then we will be here to answer questions after the presentation.
Yeah. And this is more presentation heavy this time. So I do want to take some pauses and offer if people have questions or comments. So this was just sort of showing how the values that we expressed last time would match up with actual programs and what those would be. And David's going to get into some photos and talking more specifically about, on the ground what this looks like. But does anyone have any questions about these first few slides? And sort of, I think this is really nice to show, sidewalk maintenance is something that reduces congestion because it encourages people to walk instead of drive, right? So a lot of these values can cross over with other programs that we could pay for with this fee. Does anyone have any comments or questions, or keep going? Yeah, Eric.
Just a quick question. Eric Linton, Cascades East Transit. And you see a lot of on maintenance and safety. Would this also support the creation of new connections, like filling in sidewalk gaps,
Yes.
right?
So one of the things we want, like when you think of data collection, is, and David will show a map where sidewalk gaps are, but a lot of this information needs to be validated. And it's also, as we grow, we're also creating additional gaps. But yeah, that's all part of this, because we do realize we could have the best system in the world, but if you have 200 feet of missing sidewalk, it doesn't work correctly.
And one of the things Dave's going to talk about is like our own concrete crew that does a lot of the ADA ramps. If we have more staff, we can do maybe some of that gap filling ourselves too.
Good question.
So,
Eric,
thank you.
good question. The second from the bottom would capture that the piece you're talking about is some of that infill and the missing links and gaps.
Great. Question from Joanne.
I am excited to see more safer cycle routes. So just to clarify, that means that we will have lanes that are not just the painted line, but separated either up by a level or by a barrier.
I want to be cautious how I say this. We are working towards that goal, and we will have protected bike systems in some areas and enhanced bike systems in other areas. I can't tell you that all across town we're going to have separated paths. That's our goal, definitely our goal. But as we move through, we're doing some of that work now with the GeoBond projects and other projects. But as we move through and we look at this additional revenue, we're going to be evaluating what is the best value we can get out of the money that we want to put on the ground. And I think David's got some good examples of, as we go through and do a street maintenance project, how do we look at that system and can we make it better, knowing we can't rebuild the entire thing, but can we stripe it better? Can we enhance the crossings and do other things? That's what really allows us both the ability and the staff horsepower to look at all these things kind of holistically as we're moving through the process.
I hope we can continue to improve on what we have. So if right now what we have is a painted line, can we put the little bumps so that drivers know, hey, they're going into a lane that is not theirs? So I think that let's lean into the safer cycle route. Thank you.
All right, David, let's go into your.
Oh, sorry, could I?
Oh, yeah.
One more quick.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just curious if there's any coordination with Ben Parks on the bike ped trails and the like, and
There,
like what share of the inventory or any efficiency?
yeah,
optimization?
right now, we're actually working on it's kind of, we call it the north, south, east, west system, which is not only a GeoBond project, but also a council goal. And part of that actually uses the Ben Park and Rec system to complete that network. So yes, because we also realize many of the trail systems that Ben's Park and Recs are the safer systems that we want to utilize that around town that we want to use.
Yeah, and we also have an intergovernmental agreement in terms of maintenance of that system, like what we maintain, what they maintain. It's pretty complex, but we have all of that documented.
Thanks. Yeah, just curious, and maybe this will be for later in terms of staffing and some of the efficiencies and where people are stationed, but thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Okay, one more from Elisa, and then we'll let David get started.
I just had a question about the staff. When you were talking about maintenance staff, could it also include something like a dedicated multimodal staff person?
Yeah, we'll get into
We'll get into
Talk
that.
about
We
that.
kind of got an example
Yes.
staffing plan on this.
All right, go ahead.
All right, good morning again. I got a number of slides and there'll be the opportunity for some questions at the end, but let's start off with Pine Brook Boulevard as an example. This was a street preservation project this year. And in an example of our street preservation work that we're trying to do now, which in this case included the restriping of the existing pavement, for buffered bike lanes as feasible, adding ADA ramps. We have to have ADA ramp compliancy on our paving work, but we're also adding ramps where they didn't exist before, if appropriate, and really just kind of having that more multimodal approach. This connects with many of the values that we just saw and talked about, and we should and want to do more of this type of enhancement work along with our maintenance work. Real quick discussion on methodology. Our past approach in pavement maintenance preservation was really projects were identified based on that pavement condition index that we talked about in the roundtable meeting number 1. PCI, potholes, the cracking, the rutting, and replacing those kind of in kind back in the day as originally striped. Upgrading the compliancy requirements for the ADA ramps with that. And what we've been working on with the new TSP and community values, is how can we enhance these elements alongside with our maintenance work while we're out there and boots on the ground. So while still considering the pavement condition, which also includes the bike lanes and the pedestrian crossings, and protecting our investment. While that's still important, we also want to, consider things. Is that street a key route? Is it a neighborhood greenway, part of our low stress network? Is it a primary transit route? Is it a safe route to school? Consider crash data. Is there missing sidewalk segments, as was brought up? And then we also want to consider, what changes can we make within that existing roadway? Can that width be used differently to make room for a safer multimodal improvement? Can we add ADA ramps where they're needed? Remove turn lanes or medians, for example, where not necessary to provide that more real estate curb to curb width to work with for those improvements and enhancements, such as buffered bike lanes or protected bike lanes, perhaps. Bike safety, buffered, protected, separated. Is there opportunities for those? And then ped safety, enhancing crossings, whether that's a median or median refuge, signage, markings, things of that nature. So this approach going forward, it adds additional costs, whether if we're removing or constructing things such as medians, there's the added striping cost, essentially doubles, as you can see there in the picture. And then there's the increase in materials and inflationary costs and things that we've been talking about, which limits then how many lane miles we can touch if we're doing these added enhancements. Another example from this season is OB Riley Road. So on the left, there's the before, and on the right is after the paving work. So again, kind of work that real estate differently, added buffered bike lanes. We added curb ramps and added a crosswalk in there to provide for some safety enhancements. And enhanced crossings, they can improve safety, help with our Vision Zero efforts, promote more use of our system for folks who want to walk or roll in our community. And we have quick build opportunities out there at existing intersections in our system. Janet Ruby in the back of the room here with us and her team have identified a number of those where enhanced, safer use of our system can be achieved. And we'd like to also, with our maintenance work, be able to look at that more holistically and do some of that work. Here we've got Peril and Reed Lane, enhanced crossing example. And while our neighborhood street safety program is able to make some targeted improvements, that program's limited or typically targeted in certain scope areas. And as we were just talking about, we have that opportunity for some quick build enhancements out there alongside our maintenance work. And while we're out there protecting our investment and assets, we're touching 882 lane miles at some point. And while we're out there, there's these opportunities for these enhanced and safer improvements. Talk about our conditions here real quick. Back in 2015, we started a concerted effort to improve our pavement condition index. Back then, we were system-wide was a 68. Initially, we focused on the arterials and collectors. It's got the most users, business, commerce, supplies. And today, our average PCI in the arterials and collectors, we're at 80. So we've come a long ways, got a little bit more to go there. We were then able to start getting out into some of our local roads. That's our largest category in the system. 73% of our system, or the 646 lane miles, is local residential roads. Like we talked about in Roundtable 1, inflation, cost of materials, constraints has slowed our progress, and we want to enhance and improve our system above and beyond just PCI. The very poor roadways, it's kind of that red color up there is the worst. Those are typically failed roads. And with our limited maintenance dollars, we're not focusing on that real expensive reconstruction work need. We talked last time about keep the good roads good philosophy, and that's where we're at with our maintenance dollars today. Maintenance is a cycle, never goes away. It's always there, and it's a marathon. It's not a sprint race. And so as you see there, not surprisingly, some of the older core areas of town are showing some of that red, orange color. Makes sense. They're some of the oldest streets in our community. Talk a little bit about protecting our investment. The community value ties to that enhance our street quality. We talked some about this some at our first roundtable, but that keep the good roads good philosophy, really to be able to use our most economical maintenance program and treatments for our transportation system and be good stewards of our taxpayers' funds. So brand new road to be on the left side of that up in the green. As it ages, oxidizes, becomes brittle, cracking, potholes, conditions worsen, and that treatment cost increases substantially as that road ages. So you'll note the cost difference there in the graph. If we're up there in above that dash line of fair, typically it's about $4 a square yard to keep that road in that good condition. If it gets beyond that and down into the orange and the red, that cost increases substantially, $19 a square yard. You're looking at some of the paving work, and you get down into that red, that's that expensive reconstruction effort. And like I said, maintenance is always there, never goes away. 882 lane miles in our system are not all on the same cycle. They're built at different times, different years, they're different ages. And so our maintenance or street preservation effort varies year by year on where are those needs in our community. Typically, a 7-year cycle is ideal for street maintenance. Like every 7 years, you think about the sun and oxidizing and the temperature swings, especially here in Central Oregon. About every 7 years, we should be treating a road. And our deferred maintenance, the replacement value on the system. Thank you, Sarah. Replacement value is $829 million. I'll note that is really just our asphalt and concrete surface. This is from our capital asset payment services, our annual PCI report. And that's not curb, that's not sidewalk, that's not signage and things of that nature. So it is a valuable asset for the city. It's the livelihood of our community, whether that's delivering groceries, mail, commerce, business, workplace, school. It's worth maintaining at a high level, and that is the most cost-effective approach to maintain that system. Identified by our capital asset and pavement services report, our deferred maintenance backlog, if like money wasn't an object and we want to be right where we want to be in 5 years, would be $83.5 million. Again, that's pavement, concrete, surface, not curb, sidewalk, and those things. I do want to note there that 77% of that 83.5 million, or about 64 million of that, is the rehabilitation needs. That's that expensive work. That's those failed roads. And that's down on that bottom, you know, the red area on that graph. And so 10.7% of our system, 10.7% of our 882 lane miles is down in that poor or very poor category. Here's an example from 2019. We had some funds we carried over, timing of some projects, you know, in coordination with some other work in town. But that year is our biggest street preservation contract year, and it was $7 million. And you'll note there that we were able to touch 123 lane miles. That's about 14% of our system. And that's kind of where we'd like ideally be on that 7-year cycle, like I mentioned, for maintenance. We were also able to get out and really touch some of our local roads. I've got the paving shown here. 30% of that contract, 30% of those 50 lane miles was local residential roads in addition to our slurry seal work. When we have contracts of this nature, and the map shows where we went that year, our existing concrete crew was essentially at capacity or above capacity to deal with those ADA ramps for compliancy when we're touching that many lane miles. Before we move on, just note on the bottom of that slide there, that contract for paving was $106,000 a lane mile. Next, please. Here's what we did in 2022, 2.7 million. We were only able to touch 43 lane miles, and note there the $129,000 a lane mile, that increase in cost over, you know, those 2 years of $20,000+. This is a snapshot, just 6 years, and I just want to point this out. You know, again, we have 882 lane miles in town. We're all over town, depending on the needs of that particular road and the timing. Of note here is over the last 6 years, $22 million worth of paving contracts touched 191 lane miles, compared to the slurry seal or chip seal work. Slurry seal 242 lane miles at 2.9 million, and then chip seal $1.5 million touched 92 lane miles. So the chip and slurry seals treated 75% more of our system than the paving contracts at 20% of the cost. The key there is the roadway's got to be in good condition to use those street preservation treatments, and that keep the good roads good. So moving forward, what we'd like to do is prioritization of factors. You know, while our street road surfaces are important and they're used by everybody, bike lanes, bed crossings, vehicles, we want to have a more holistic, complete street approach. And can we add safety improvements? Can we do the enhancements? Can we do striping changes, sidewalk infill, those types of things? So moving forward, you know, be looking at pedestrian crossing needs and improvements. Is there pedestrian infill needs? Neighborhood greenways, low stress network, is the maintenance timing up on syncing up with those roads? Key routes, safe routes to schools, you know, like we talked earlier, the priority transit routes. There's the boots on the ground to confirm the treatments that is needed, but those are things we'd be looking for at the planning level. And then, you know, there's also the consideration of the other work going on in town. As everybody knows, there's a lot, that $190 million GeoBond and private development work. There's a lot happening in town. Few pictures here are, like I mentioned, our concrete crew during you know, street preservation robust years is pretty much a capacity for ADA ramp and the compliancy work, and we have the opportunity to do sidewalk repair and infill work above street preservation, above and beyond that, to complete gaps, complete, you know, connections in our community. Another example, this year's work, Butler Market Road. As you'll notice, we took away the center turn median, wasn't needed in this area, and was able to add some buffered bike lanes for some added protection. And then we'll talk about staff a little bit. An example of the staffing needs, you know, to provide the higher level of service, deliver on the community values. So I talked about the concrete crew, you know, really kind of being at capacity. Current staff, we've got a concrete crew of about 8. And they're focused on really that ADA ramp work. If we could do that proactive out infill pedestrian, showing a couple of folks there to really 100% focus on some of that program work, that complete street safety, vision zero kind of ped bike program type work. Example here of what concrete crews are capable of. If they got the capacity of the resources, this was Milwaukee Avenue, one of the neighborhood greenways. It was a missing section of sidewalk, as you see on the left there with the shrubbery. And we want to have the capacity and resources to do more of this work. But this was a self-performed sidewalk infill that we'd like to do more of in our community. Another example is South 3rd Street, Railroad Street. This is at the 3rd Street underpass of the railroad, kind of south of town there, and Railroad Street ties into 3rd. On the top left there was no curb, there was no sidewalk, and we were able to get in there and do some sidewalk and ramp work. Another example of what we'd like to do more of. This is an example of the concepts that we are seeing from capital improvement projects, the $190 million GEO bond, some of the private development work that's going with our new standards and codes. So as you can see, there's protected areas, protected bike lanes, which is all good stuff, green bike lanes. We need the equipment and staff to be able to get in there and to handle those areas. And then just this shows kind of what some of that additional or prioritized legends and marking crew, the few staff there, they'd be focused on these things while the striping truck is taking care of our town. Enhanced plowing and sweeping. Couple of examples here, but the new equipment, we demoed a couple of units. The picture on the right was a demo. Was not that happy with it. We're going with the top left. We're purchasing a couple of these, putting in the order here soon, like this next month. Council will see it next month. Thanks to the MPO for helping support one of these. But it's two pieces of equipment, needs some folks to run it, and the two pieces of equipment aren't going to cover the whole town. And so we'll just grow as the system grows and those improvements are made. But as Russ mentioned, we want folks to be able to run these, take care of the multimodal system, not go take care of the streets first and then get out and get into this. On the bottom left, that's a toolcat. We're also picking up, and thanks to the MPO here as well, an additional toolcat. There's different attachments, snow blowers, brooms, plows. That'd be for that kind of winter ops maintenance of multimodal paths, key routes, that type of thing, and be able to be proactive and do that day one of a storm, not priority, 4 or 5 after other plowing has occurred.
Thanks, David. Just to sum up a couple of the things before we get into questions, I'm sure people have is, one of the points I think we're trying to show here is that when we have a more robust budget for David's team, they can touch more streets and they can think about doing beyond just the bare pavement repair and moving into enhancements. And to translate that to folks in the community, your street in front of your house more likely to be touched sooner, improved sooner, maintained better if we have the funding for David and his team. And then to Lisa's point, additional staff to focus solely on some of those multimodal goals and other safety programs so that they're not also handling service requests and other things as part of their job. So would love to hear people's reactions to kind of this information, if it's helpful and useful, and helps tell the story. Any questions that you have, and other ideas on how we can continue to explain, what do you get for this fee? Well,
Yeah, this is a really good presentation. I like the information. More of a comment, like kind of what I captured. I think the staff and equipment narrative is really valuable because I think it, messages how we're able to unlock, more, efficiency, and we can do more things, right? So like with staff and equipment, you can do a better maintenance strategy and you have maintenance efficiency. And then with the equipment, it allows us to actually enhance our network. So you're saying we can't plow a protected bike lane very easily, but having this equipment allows us to even build the bike lanes, which I think is really crucial. And that's a big chunk of funding. And it's easier to stomach that when it doesn't, when that can change year to year based on the budgeting aspects. And then as you were talking about the networks, and I made this little network journey map. And the first part is improve the network. So that's all the like PCI stuff, the work that we need to get done right now. But eventually that allows us to start augmenting the network, adding the paths and those sorts of things as well. And then what I see at the very end is that once we can build all the paths and have bike lanes and stuff, our network is burdened less. Therefore, it's getting less used, especially by vehicles that cause the most damage to the network, and allows us to free up even more budget to do even more things. So I think it's hard to like, for me, it took me a while to like wrap my head around that, but there's a cart before the horse sort of situation here that I think the community would be really, valuable in putting that narrative piece together. So
Good points on the maintenance piece and then the enhancement. And we'd love to, when we're boots on the ground and we got a project out there that's happening, can we do both and be efficient at the same time and improve that system to make it more usable for folks to want to do and help with congestion? And that's all good stuff. And then, the geo bond and the capital, all those other things building up. Like I said, when we get there, that's great, less burden. There's more of a maintenance burden, which is a piece of what we're talking here, but that's great. And if we can maintain it at a high level at the most cost-effective way, that's where we want to be.
I'll give you another quick example I've been using just on greenways, because I ride around town. I was riding out to Pine Nursery, going down the 6th Street Greenway. I also ride the Milwaukee Greenway a lot. Right now, what we would do, we don't even have the money to go. Those roads are not in great shape. We don't have the money right now to even maintain those roads because we're focused on kind of the other parts of the system. If we can get the money through this to now start looking at those systems, we also just don't want to go in there and just repave it and restripe it where it was. What other things can we do now? And that's where the staffing and the programmatic elements come in of, well, if we're in there, can we do, some type of traffic calming or bring in a couple curb returns to slow traffic down and create safer things? Can we stripe it differently and sign it differently? So that's kind of the theme of what we're trying to do here, is just to have the resources top to bottom to have a more holistic look at the system.
Other comments and questions? Okay, Joanne, and then Elisa. Go ahead, Joanne.
I want to put my mother, my hat as a mother, and just as I see Obi Riley and how it's repaved and it has the bumper bike lanes, I am reminded that we lost a student at Mount View High School this summer. And I'm thinking, how can we move from this performative allyship or performative sense of safety to engineering safety into our design? I hope that's something that, the buffer lane is not doing it for me as a mother. And then another thing around framework that I just want everybody to consider is equity is the unequal distribution of time, resources, and focus with the explicit intention of creating equal or fair outcomes. So if for the city to do an income-based process that may be more cumbersome, it actually aligns with the value of equity rather than thinking that a discount later on, a handout, is actually a foundation for an equitable outcome. So that was it. And nothing personal. I love every staff in the city. Thank you. We're learning together. We're growing together.
Lisa.
Yeah, just to piggyback on Joanne's comment and earlier, and then I'll go on to my actual questions. If the utility fee was income-based, like you were Elizabeth, you were saying that you're not really sure that it correlates exactly with income versus the use of the actual system. I do believe that lower income households use cars like a third of the amount as upper income ones, and those are the ones that are creating more burden on the system. So that's a consideration. But my questions to David too is, one, you were talking about prioritization of things based on if they were greenways or key routes or safe routes to school. And my question is, would you actually be building things to a different standard based on those prioritizations also, or just touching those systems first? And then the second question was, if when we do have to rebuild streets completely, if we built them in a more narrow and engineered to a more bike forward way, would that not cost less to maintain in the future if all of the streets were more narrow?
So couple things on the reconstructs. Those are typically a capital improvement type projects, and that's where the comment about engineering going forward, safety, and we're seeing that with some of the geobond work and the protected bike lane and pathways such as Wilson and the protected elements there at the roundabout. So we're heading there on the engineering side, and we can maintain it. It starts out as a new road, and so for resources and equipment and staff and funding to maintain it at that and keep it at that high level, then yes, that is much more cost effective. The maintenance piece, we want to take care of a whole system, but layering in those prioritization factors. Then also, if there's the resources, which transportation fee could provide some opportunity for, and that boots on the ground aspect of it is, okay, what can we do? It's a maintenance project, not a capital improvement project. Blow up the whole street and rebuild it like a capital effort. But what can we do? Like Russell's mentioned, can we add curb bulb outs? Can we do some kind of modal filters? Like what additional things can we change for efficiency with our maintenance work and make it safer and more economical?
I think that we would love to do all types of things. It's a capital question. How much money do we have and where do we want, knowing that we have limited dollars, what's the most effective way to deploy that on the ground? Because I think we all agree, we'd love to do major enhancements to the entire system. And these are just questions really for the community and for council when we come to budgets, because we can do a very limited amount of, do a lot, or we can, what level of service do we want to get on a system? Do we want to go heavy in like a mile of road, or we want to get to a safer, not maybe at the full end spectrum of what we want, but a safer route for 5 miles? Those are the hard questions. And that's where we want to use data to help try to solve and provide guidance in how we want to direct those funds. It's really comes down to, we just have a limited budget. And so how do we want to deploy those funds?
Yeah, and I think some of the additional staffing can help us in not just being reactive, but being more proactive in implementing our TSP, which has a lot of these goals and these enhanced levels of service written into it. So I think if we have staff that are concentrating on that and sort of look to as the person to coordinate some of that maintenance, and also tell David's crew, here's what the enhanced plan is for this road that you could maybe implement as you're maintaining it or repaving it. I think that's efficiency and also helping to raise the level of service per our TSP and I think staffing is a big part of that, as well as the money for the actual
Work.
pavement.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm looking at Janet, and I know that right now she's probably has 10 to 20% of her available bandwidth to answer all these questions with all the other work that she is doing. So what we're trying to do is, can we get dedicated staff in there to look at this almost full time to help solve this question, instead of trying to, we jump in and out of a lot of conversations and we're trying to get the best information we can, but they're usually, we would like to make more informed, more data-driven decisions around this.
Yeah, I saw some hands over here. Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, Eric Lint again. I'd like to take a step back and appreciate what David just showed us. Like, this is a big comprehensive plan, and it reflects a change in thinking, I think, for City of Bend. We're doing things smartly, proactively, and able to plan ahead because we're talking about stable funding. Some of what we talked about here with street sweepers comes from COVID relief funds. And 5 years ago, we wouldn't have that on our budget line items. Who imagines COVID funding as a funding source, right? So looking at why we're having this discussion, talking about a stable revenue source for the projects that we see a clear need for, this allows us to plan smartly and have that proactive approach to things. So I just appreciate that.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, thanks on that proactive point. I'm curious that the deferred maintenance costs are daunting as expected. And even with this new fee revenue, it's unlikely to be able to fully cover that. And so I'm curious, in terms of proactive options, are there ways to reduce the inventory in terms of decommissioning it all or privatizing? I know that's tricky, but maybe sort of forward looking, are there ways to influence growth in terms of how much new inventory comes along with any growth level? And
well, I think as we move forward, I think the land use patterns that we're seeing and directives coming out of the state is going to force denser development. So you're going to see more kind of, you could say, units per mile of road going on, and we're going to see more compact development. So that'll help kind of downside out, but I don't think there's anything on our current system that we could kind of de-invest in at this point.
Well, as we talked before, I think private roads provide, I think the public doesn't sort of recognize the difference between a private and public road. And we are seeing a lot of HOAs sort of say, hey, we need some help. They, you know, the same conversation that we're having on the system, they're having at a local scale, and they realize the cost is pretty massive. So we have really moved away from privatizing our streets, and also provides other challenges in terms of just setting standards and all that. But I do think that going back to what Russ is saying, like the data shows with our core area, when we have a block and grid system, there is some capacity. I think when you look at our asset compared to other cities, we have a lot of lane miles for our population. We can kind of grow into it. It's part of like, you know, smart growth principles of relying on the system and not building more of it to reduce our maintenance costs moving forward.
One more thing I'll say, especially for the Ben community, when you look at our growth patterns, think about when Ben really took off in growth, and then do the math on the number of years, and you're starting to see the life cycle of all that development come due now, right? We're all in the 10, 15, 20, 25 years worth of development. And that's when you're starting to see the big dollars show up for transportation maintenance to come into effect. And that's why we're hearing from other communities, because of the growth that occurred in the city at a particular moment in time.
Right. And it is a policy in our TSP, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but when we're talking about adding travel miles, because to Elisa's point, if you have narrower roads, less pavement to maintain, that's a way to sort of like shrink down your responsibility for the future. And I know that our TSP says when we're looking at travel miles, you need to look at alternatives before you add an extra travel mile to any new road, right? You need to be thinking about, instead of that, can we make a separated path or some other way for people to get around so that we're not adding that to our future maintenance, right?
And thanks. No, that's all really helpful. And just sort of as a bookmark for when we go back into mechanisms more next time, some utilities have additional charges for new inventory beyond some date. I know King County with their wastewater system, there's a separate capacity charge for any inventory that came on past a certain date. I think that trip count mechanism is one way to also think about that as well, that if there are certain portions of new inventory that have sort of an outpaced burden on maintenance, we might think about variable options on the fee.
Yeah, Gina.
Thanks. Gina Franzosa with the Transportation Bond Oversight Committee. Thanks for the presentation. That is a lot more detail than last time that I've seen to date. So that's really great. Two comments really. One, I hope that those positions on the bike and ped mobility would be prioritized, because to Russ's point, that will, I think, fill a gap in your staffing. I hope Janet doesn't mind that I'm saying that, but I need to really analyze that data and help to prioritize, you know, the bike and ped routes around town. And then the other point is that one picture you showed gave me heart palpitations, the gigantic intersection with like 6 lanes in all directions and then a bike lane painted in green. It's like that to me actually exemplifies like where I think our city standards for roads are excessive and are painting us into a corner where then we have an overly expensive system to maintain in the long run. And so I really encourage the city, I know we're talking about transportation utility fee, but I really encourage council and staff to prioritize taking a second look at our standards, or third look or fourth look, and making them more efficient and, to Joanne's point, safer, because wider roads mean faster cars, which means less safe for all the other users on the roads.
Yeah, thanks, Gina. Yeah, so that image, we debated on which image to show in there. We just wanted to show an example of like, if you're trying to enhance intersections, you're going to have more striping and more legends and more things to do. That's like a concept picture of Reed and Third. So 2 of our biggest streets, right? And ODOT's involved in that as well. So I don't think that's necessarily what's going to end up there. I mean, to your point, yes, that already is a very large intersection that's difficult for people to cross through. But I think an example of just if we want to have additional lanes and other types of even smaller enhanced intersections, we're going to have more painting and kind of more striping to do. And we want to invest in that and make sure we're keeping it up. If we put it right.
A great example is downtown, right at Franklin and Wall Street. There was green paint that was put across that intersection. Go take a look at it today, right? That's a perfect example of like, we just don't have the staff and resources in that kind of timely nature to get to all these new elements that we're putting on the ground.
Right. All right. Anybody else? Yeah, Richard. And then we're going to take a little break, and we can come back with more.
Yeah. Do we have to push the button?
Okay.
Yeah, Richard Ross. I wanted to comment on David's presentation. I think it is important to get out to the public how small things matter. And like the before and after shots show us that small things really change the environment, change the safety sense of the city. But I think also another thing that's harder to get across maybe is that more staff matters. And that I think was well brought up with that, yes, you can get many of these things that are desirable for the city and you can help them happen, but it takes more bodies on the street or in the back room making the good plans that will help Bend's street system really evolve into a safer amenity for the community, for all members.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, so let's do one more question and then we're gonna take a break because I think people need to stand up and we'll come back and we'll do more. So don't worry. Yeah, Leslie. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Leslie Cano with the Latino Community Association. It's just more of a comment, just because I've noticed that when it comes to the budget priorities that were listed, there seems to be different variables as to to consider in the how to prioritize improvements, how much money it'll cost. I saw some things had $1 signs, some things had a few. Also, whether it's on a residential road or a key route. So I'm just really hoping that when you all are serving and kind of prioritizing where these improvements will go, it's from an equitable approach. And then also wanting to comment on the examples of the improvements. I think that was great to show. One thing that I have noticed when I have talked to others about the implementation of this transportation fee is just that clarity that they need, right? I think it's good that you broke down the budget priorities, but I think it can even go a further step into really showing specific examples, just kind of like what you did with the past improvements, showing future improvements, renderings of what community members can expect to see. Thank you.
So we'll take about a let's see, what's our break? 10 minutes, Sarah? 15 minutes? 15 minutes break. In front of you is this key messages, 5 things to know. If you could take a look at that on the break and then we'll come back and chat about that first when we come back. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Let's come back to the table. Let me know when we're back on, Sarah. Turn my mic back on. Okay, great. So hopefully folks had a chance to look at these sort of key messages from our 5 things to know. These were the questions we were trying to answer that kind of came out some of the discussions and feedback we've gotten. So I would love to hear from people in the group about these sort of key messages. Are we hitting the key messages? Are there other questions that you think are really key? We want to have some sort of summary way to really just answer quickly some of those key questions. This doesn't mean we can't go into detail with people that want more, or that we can't, present a lot of the information you saw today when we go out to neighborhoods, but we really wanted to have just sort of like these key concepts nailed as far as, what we're doing here and why. So open to comments on this if these are covering some of the things you're hearing from folks. If there's other things we're missing that are key questions regarding what is the fee and what will it be used for. Let's start with Kim and then Councilor Burton. Yeah. We gotta have to hold on, Kim. People online can't hear you unless you have a mic. We got budget for more mics somewhere.
It looks like we're gonna touch on this further down in the agenda, but I was just wondering, I didn't see a lot of comment about the non-residential fees and how that's gonna affect businesses.
Yeah, okay, so effects on businesses. Okay, great. Councilor Perkins.
Yeah, I was just, can we go back to just the questions? I think, one thing that we heard a lot today, and I know that we're going to talk about this at our next meeting, is really number 3, and how do we really humanize this? How will this affect my daily commute? How will this affect my kids going to school every day? I think we really need to kind of drill down on that. How much money? I mean, I think, Will, your point was really important here. Like, how much money is this going to cost the average person? What does that mean? And so I would just encourage that when we have a communications strategy for this, that number 3 is really important. And I love that idea of like almost like a flow chart, right? This all, this affects this, which affects this, which affects this, which affects this, that, and so all of the things that we need money for all really flow into each other. So just wanted to add that.
Great. Other thoughts about making sure we're answering these questions well for the community? Yeah, go ahead.
I would just say that we'd want to be clear what this means. So I think when people would see these messages, they might think that when you say transportation system, that might include like CET, and really explaining that this is separate from, especially for my population specific to dial-a-ride, that this is not, this fee would not necessarily contribute to CET, but it's actually the road. So just being really clear on what this actually means.
For city operations on our city streets. Great point. Okay. Yeah, well, we need another mic on this, but no, we're good.
I think to that point, I almost made it at the end of the last discussion, but one piece that CTE does a great job of fulfilling, but I think public transportation, especially in the winter, I ride my bike. I've ridden it 5,000 miles on Bend streets over the past 2 years. I ride my bike in the winter, but I know a lot of other people are probably not going to do that, even if they ride it in the summer. So, how do people are going to get back in their cars, but if we're reducing the narrowing streets and making things, better for bike and pedestrian, what else can we do? And I know this funding stream does not pay for a light rail or more buses or anything of that nature, but we may have to think about, is there some other vision piece that we need to put together so that, there is a public infrastructure, public transportation part to this. I just think that's a missing piece to all of these conversations because it's hilly and winter is difficult to bike in, and to walk in. And it's great that the sidewalks will be plowed and paths and that's all phenomenal. But if there's not an alternative option besides getting back in your car again, you just get locked back into that mindset of getting in your car in the summer. And so if we can keep people outside, out of their vehicles as long as possible with some sort of other mobility option, then I think that's valuable. And again, not necessarily for this budget, but it's something to think about.
Melanie.
Yeah.
Yeah, Eric Lent, Cascades East Transit. Just appreciating the comments. Thank you. Just like how we talked about Bend Parks works cooperatively with the city to maintain the system and enhance the services that we all enjoy. Cascades East Transit is also working with the city. We're separately looking at stabilizing our funding streams as well. But a lot of the work that's being done here will enhance our transportation systems and our transportation options as well. Talking about, the infill sidewalks, for example. So making the overall transportation system more attractive to use for alternate modes other than just driving, that helps what we do in our day-to-day operations as well. So
Yeah,
appreciate that. Thank
sounds
you.
like maybe it's not in this 5 things to know, but some kind of, other than making clear what we're talking about, but some kind of indication of CET and how we work together with the city and that they would support this type of funding for us because it will also benefit the system that they use. That sounds like a good message maybe to help with people. Okay. Okay, well, again, right, if you noodle on this tonight and you come up with something, please send it on to Sarah and us so that we have that input. Let's move into hearing from Dana about our current utility billing assistance program and some upgrades we're making to that. And then we can talk about some, how that might play into the transportation fee as well.
Okay, thank you. My name is Dana Wilson and I am the business manager for the utility. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of background and information, some things for you to consider as you're discussing the policy decision for the transportation fee. I'll be bringing some programs to council next week for their hopeful adoption. Because our current programs are over 40 years old, and we have a bill discount program and we have a one-time credit program that are really narrowly focused in terms of what discounts are provided and what customers are served. These programs are focused on low-income customers over the age of 62, people with disabilities, and the discounts are on sewer and stormwater fees, a 50% base discount. During COVID, we were able to stand up some temporary programs that provided funds from ARPA and from, and let me know, ARPA is the American Rescue Plan Act, the COVID recovery funding, and donated funds. And we worked with a community partner, Neighbor Impact, to help qualify and distribute assistance in our community. They were able to gather data that we never would have been able to gather at the city, things about gender, age, income, family size, so on, of who was receiving assistance in our community. Through this, we learned that 60% of the people receiving assistance were families, multi-generational families and households with children under the age of 17. 64% were on supplemental nutrition or temporary assistance through the Oregon Health Department programs. 12% were people with disabilities and 10% were seniors. So we were able to use that data to propose a couple of new programs to bring to council, like I said, next week. And the focus is on low-income households, not just the age and ability qualifiers. And then also to try to expand this for families with children. The crisis voucher program is there for reference. It's not informative to the transportation fee conversation, but happy to talk to you about that if you have any questions about it. The bill discount program is a monthly discount, and it is a discount off of base service charges for water services that include water, sewer, and stormwater. The range that you see there actually reflects the type of service someone would receive. It's not a sliding scale. 355 would be someone who's received stormwater only services from the city, and 3674 would be someone who receives water, sewer, and stormwater services. That's the gist of the program. The last thing to tell you about this is that it's an income qualifying program open to anyone at or below 60% area media income. And families on those supplemental nutrition and temporary assistance programs have automatic enrollment in the program. So it's just, we're removing a barrier for those families to participate. They'll open this now with any questions or conversation that might help you.
And I think I would say, so this is what we're doing right now with our current utility bill, and what Sarah had worked on in that first roundtable and talked about. An assumption we made was, I forget the number, what a number we received from Neighbor Impact.
2,000.
2,000 we made an assumption that those folks would not pay the transportation fee, and that would be the program would be if you qualified those 2,000 people, you would get a zero. As you can see, this assistance program, we still pay a little bit. So it is a policy decision. We could say you pay half, you pay none, but we have calculated in that zero out and just saying some people would be exempt from this fee if they qualify for that program. And that's something that we would then add to this program that Dana is already running. But we just want to make sure you knew what was already happening at the city as far as assisting people with utility bills, and that it could be applied to the transportation fee as well. So anyone have questions for Dana?
I have one. So Dana, so that's the actual amount people would pay. The 36, I'm sorry, the 355 up to 36. Or that's the
amount of the discount.
That's the amount of the discount. So I think it would be helpful to see for council next week what they would actually pay if we can't show that. And that's the 50% off the base,
Off the
right?
base fee.
Okay.
It doesn't apply to consumption, volume, or franchise fees.
Are there any challenges to accessing the eligible households when they aren't owners or multifamily renters, things like that?
Yeah, multifamily households don't have, they don't receive services in their name. So there is a barrier for multifamily households, yes.
And those utility bills usually typically go to the owner of the building, not the individual residences in the apartments.
So Dana, just a question, do you know what would happen if someone says, hey, I'm on SNAP, and I need assistance paying the utility bill? Would, because I know Neighbor Impact has their own program where they help people pay bills. So if they were living in an apartment where we couldn't really parse them out of the utility bill, they would still have maybe that opportunity with Neighbor Impact, or what's the way to kind of get at those folks?
Absolutely. And that's actually one of the benefits of working with Neighbor Impact is that when customers go there to qualify, they actually are plugged into the other federal and state programs or anything Neighbor Impact has to offer. And currently, so the crisis voucher actually will go into effect in April of next year. That's when federal funding for the low income household water assistance program expires. We didn't want any of our customers to come to us before that program expired because that benefit is greater than what the city of Bend can offer. So we didn't want to accidentally exclude someone from future benefits. So yeah, plugging into Neighbor Impact is a good way to get resources.
Yeah.
I have a comment. It's very expensive to be poor. It takes time, effort, and resources to try to access a discount. So I love that it's integrated with the SNAP process. However, there are many community members that are eligible for SNAP that choose not to apply, and there are community members that are just not eligible because of the requirements. Additionally, as you mentioned, Neighbor Impact utilizes federal funds, which excludes the most vulnerable among us. So I really hope that we can have some more nuanced conversation on how are we going to center the least among us rather than do the after the fact discount. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you, Dana, for giving us this background. And we will be kind of, I think, diving more into equity at the next roundtable as well. So more time to have some of those conversations. Okay. So we're going to move into talking about the non-residential side of this fee. So that's people who aren't residential, but all the other various folks who pay utility bills in Bend. And so Sarah and Ben are going to take us through that.
Sarah.
Yes, and I forgot to introduce myself earlier. I'm Sarah Hudson, Senior Policy Analyst, the one that's emailing a lot of you. So. In any case, I just wanted to back up. I know there's a lot of questions about the non-residential fee, and we're going to be going through process to really shape that more. And Ben is going to discuss that engagement plan in more detail. But I wanted to take a step back and provide a little bit of context and a little bit more information about how this looks in other communities, just as a frame of reference. So on this slide, we're showing a sampling of communities in Oregon that have a transportation fee and the general structure they use to assess it on the non-residential or business side. So everyone does it a little bit differently, but it generally falls into about 4 categories, ranging from a flat fee to this kind of trip generation model that we touched upon earlier when Samantha was speaking. And it really ranges on the left side from being easier to administer, quicker to implement, kind of simpler to understand from a business side. But then as you have a more kind of nuanced structure and a little bit more complexity, there's a bit more fairness and equity in how it impacts different businesses because it's taking into account the different business uses. So when I say flat fee, I mean every business is charged the same amount. And when we provided initial fee estimates at a high level, we threw out a number. We said if every business account was charged the same, they would expect to pay $215 based on the number of business accounts in our system, in our community. But as you see on this table, only one community does that. It's not the preferred approach because it's not seen as equitable of an approach to how to assess the fee. When we're talking about flat fee within a class, we're talking about how there's kind of bins of uses. So kind of low to high trip generators on the system. They're grouped into buckets, generally maybe 3 to 7 categories based on that use. And then if you are in that bin, you are charged the same amount. So you're getting a little bit more complexity, but it's still like a pretty straightforward way to implement it. Then you look at kind of that variable within class category. That is definitely the most common approach. So that is taking those bins, but having another factor, but like a multiplier within that to take into account the differences. So you might look at square footage or acres or some other factor to know that not everyone's going to have the same use. So it adds a little bit more complexity there. Again, more fair. And then the trip generation model would be that every single business is charged an individual fee based on their exact use. And that becomes pretty complex to administer because especially if you have a lot of change in use of businesses, every time that business changes use, you have to figure out how much they should be charged. And it's not as preferred of an option. When we spoke to other communities and doing a lot of research for the transportation fee, a lot of them advised us try to keep a simple approach. That kind of variable within class approach was tended to be recommended, or the flat fee within class, just because of getting a little bit more of that equity, but still having that simplicity in administration. And then some communities have other mechanisms altogether. Sherwood's an example. They use impervious surface area, but I've heard they're moving away from that. So there's just different ways you can approach it, but just wanted to provide that framework of the different ways other communities go about thinking through this. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think you teed it up really well. And I think if we just jump to the next slide, Ben Hempson, Economic Development Manager, by the way. Since this is a complex topic, really want to shift that conversation into the Bend Economic Development Advisory Board, a board I staff that Kevin sits on over the next few months. They meet publicly, really to do 2 things. First, identify a methodology. We have a lot of paths we can go down here. I'll note the more diverse the economy, typically the more complex the methodology is. And Bend has a very diverse economy. Talk about that all day, but we won't do it here. No one needs that presentation. Really what we want to do is identify the methodology, really start with some of the bigger stakeholders or economic development partners that we work with that represent broad swaths of the business community, the Chamber, EDCO, Visit Bend, and then on October 2nd, sit down with BDAB and really talk through maybe 1 or 2 different methodologies that we can then actually take if we get some buy-in from BDAB and have focus groups in October and November with impacted businesses. And I'm not just talking about businesses that are going to pay a very high fee, or nonprofits for that matter. We kind of class them the same. I'm talking about folks that maybe sit in the middle of the fee schedule or on the low end, and just figure out really what does the implementation look like? Do we have a phase-in period, or do we need a phase-in period for certain businesses? Do we have an appeals process if you feel like you've been miscategorized? And just how transparent and how simple is the process for the average business owner? Councilor Broadman and I were at a meeting of businesses yesterday. We talked about this very briefly, and someone said, well, I don't pay a sewer fee. My landlord pays that. And it was like, well, you will pay this fee, right? It will be passed on. So I think there's going to also have to be some actual communication using our newsletter, using our partners to make sure that businesses understand kind of where we're heading here. And they have an opportunity to weigh in as well. We may do some surveying on top of that. But really where we want to end up by the end of this year is in front of council with some BDAB representatives and maybe other business owners really with some policy options for council, right? So we may have looked at one or two different methodologies, and then we may have some other kind of questions for council to make as our policy making body as well. So that's really where we want to head. And to go back to Kim's earlier question, I think we are going to shift now into just some more open discussion around the non-residential.
Yeah, I mean,
fee, unless there are questions.
Yeah, I think this is our plan, and you can go to the next slide, Sarah, to engage with the business community and help get input from them. And these are just some factors to consider, right? So Sarah's talked about, you know, the more complicated you get, the little bit harder it is to implement, but the more granular it might be. So where do we want to end up on that scale? We've heard in this group, and I think we want to make sure we're thinking about small businesses. We've mentioned specific business types like childcare businesses, right? And how that's going to impact them. There could be some different approaches depending on which part of the system we're talking about. For instance, schools or hotels and motels. We've heard a lot from people about how do we ensure that the visitors are contributing to this fee. And one of that is the things that visitors use when they come here, right? And drive to town. We have, you know, nonprofits and other businesses that don't pay property taxes, but they do have a utility bill. So how do we think about that? And then how do we think about the classes of businesses and uses that do generate more trips and impact the system? And we can use the data that we have as well to think about that too. So what I would love to hear from folks in this group is there's other considerations you want to take into focus groups or take into talking to community partners about how to develop the non-residential side and what that looks like. You know, concerns about specific business types or others that are going to be impacted by this. We want to hear that sort of, we don't need to figure out the methodology today, but just hear the high level concerns or questions you may have about how this impacts on the non-residential side. Yeah, Joanne.
Thanks, Mayor. I think that it will be wise to also include revenue of businesses. I think that it is important to look at who is able to pay property taxes, but all business have some revenue, and that will help us really understand how much money is flowing into the community and assess, you know, what is the level of contribution that businesses can participate on. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could interpret that a little bit. There are businesses that have higher margins than others, right? So I think that's part of consideration. Like when I see small businesses, I know they're, especially for instance, our restaurants who struggled to make it through the pandemic, or childcare that has a lot of upfront costs on creating their space, right? So I think that it's important to think about that. Yeah. But
Yes,
correct
and
me if what you're referring to.
and I know, sorry, English is a second language, and
That's okay, yeah.
sometimes things don't come, you know, as fluid as I hope. One example is during the pandemic, farm owners in rural Central Oregon, many bought trucks instead of doing the subsidy to their employees and whatnot. And similarly, we can see that business owners can write off a lot of new growth and expenses. And so that's why I think it's important to not just look at like who has a bigger margin, but what is the revenue coming in, because the margin can be doctor. And so that was, I'm not a economic business expert, but just thinking of there's a lot of money flowing in the community. How can we look at it? Thank you.
So Lisa, yeah.
I just had a question in terms of all the funds that are going to be collected, like what percentage are going to be coming from the residential fees versus the business fees?
47, am I right?
Yeah, so yeah, 53% is residential, 47% is non-residential. And again, that was based off of the transportation model, which kind of gave us that overall trip generation from those two categories.
Yeah.
I would just add, I think it's important as we talk about small businesses in this scenario, all of the small businesses are going to be, or most of them are going to be residents also. So, you know, I think we should keep in mind, this isn't, it's not either or, and the small business owners in this community who also own homes are going to be doubly burdened which is, again, appropriate because this is a fee, not a tax. It's based on actual impacts to the transportation system.
Yeah, Councilor Norris, did you have?
Yeah, just one thought too, just impactful users. So I know we received a few emails about studded tires, for example, paying a higher fee or and then just weight limits, large heavy duty trucks that are impacting the system and causing a lot of need for repairs. So I just, to think about that. And then maybe Russ, do we do anything currently in regards to those?
No, not currently. We don't, in terms of either studded tires or heavy vehicles, and there's state laws and other things that we would have to pull in with legal around, like I know we get asked a lot around large construction vehicles and things like that. But we need to be careful on legal footing around. how we charge that.
Really the best way to assess like vehicle weight is at time of registration, which is not a city function. That typically happens through the DMV. It's a state. And so that's the best. And then we get a portion of that revenue through, there's a formula that highway trust fund then doles out to cities and counties. So that revenue is captured as part of that. On studded tires, the challenge there is if we were to assess it for anybody that was getting studded tires in Bend, they would just go somewhere. It really needs to be a statewide solution for it to be effective, because it's not administratively, it just doesn't work at a local level.
Yeah, and on the vehicle registration, that is part of, we didn't put up our puzzle slide today, but that's part of the transportation funding strategy that the TSB team came up with. And you saw on the one side, Washington County has a vehicle registration fee that they use for their own transportation and also dole out to their cities. So that could be something that we could advocate for in the future for
But
sure.
I do think we can look at maybe some of the transportation traffic data around construction companies or large, like the FedExes, that we know they're putting a lot of trips on the system. And I can't tell you yes or no if there's a way to separate those, but maybe we can definitely ask those questions to see if there's some commonality there.
Great. Yeah, Kevin.
Kevin Berkey with BDAB. Really, of the 47% on the commercial side, what percent is that are businesses that don't pay property taxes? Do you have a sense of that?
I don't know.
Or that are exempt?
I don't think we've taken that level. I don't know.
That you get to do that on BDAB.
Great.
Great.
Yeah, because that's an important consideration when we think about land ownership in the city and who is already exempt from paying property tax and what sort of impact this could have to them or not. But another data point. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, Kristen.
Kind of take that as my cue. I'm Kristen Donald. I work for Bend Park and Recreation District. This is the part that my board is really interested in because this would be property tax dollars intended for Park and Rec. That's also part of your safe system that would have to go to this fee. Not only that, I was just thinking of all of our locations and I don't even know how many meters we have and the impact is very different depending on which bill you're looking at for us. And how we serve the public and those dollars. So be interesting to see if government is categorized. Yes, we don't pay the property tax that goes into the street maintenance, but we also have a tax that's meant to go to something else. So this will impact us greatly because we pay a lot of utilities right now. So if government can be considered in a certain way or just how different it would be if Bend Park Rec is going to be as one entity in one category, or does each of our utility locations get a category? Would be interesting.
Good point.
Okay.
Okay, hold on. Let's see. Let's come around. Cassie, and then I saw Kim over here. Yeah.
Just along those lines, it's exactly what I was thinking as well, is especially for nonprofits that have more than one location. So we have 2 buildings. LCA, I know, has locations across the Tri-County area. So how would that impact us? Because if we're, as a nonprofit, if we are paying these additional fees, that's taking money away from services that we could be providing.
Right. Yeah. Kim.
Yeah, just a couple comments. We obviously have a lot of locations at the school district, but back to the weight of a vehicle, some of those large vehicles are carrying a lot of people, as in school buses or CET, which is reducing impacts on the roads. We need to take that into consideration also.
Yeah, and I think my thought was more towards the trucks and not, I think that some way that those should be left out.
James.
Yeah, I've had a few conversations with people about this over the last few weeks. There's a real big concern about the equity of the small businesses as to what is a business sort of in the 21st century right now. You can have somebody who's a remote worker that's a subcontractor for Microsoft that basically works out of their house versus another person who lives right next door, who has a business space out of their house. Like, I mean, could be something else. And one's going to show up in your guys' system and the other one isn't.
Well, only if a business is paying has a utility account, because this is only going to be applied per utility accounts, right?
That's how you're going to separate the
That's the
residential.
data
versus-
that we're going to have. We're not going to look at business registrations because there could be multiple businesses in one building, and then that building pays one utility account. So I think this is good information to think about. How do we communicate this out and make sure people understand that?
So
right?
right now, we like home occupancy businesses, that really wasn't on our radar to go to kind of talk about because they have limitations already that for what they can and can't do in terms of that business in their house.
Mhm.
And they're under a residential account. Now, if we get, guidance to go look at that further, we will, but right, we really separated into residential accounts, that's single family homes, and then you've got and multifamily apartments, and then you got the non-residential accounts, which are true business addresses, on business lots in town that are properly zoned. That's the separation that we have. And again, as we go through this, we may use business registration data to help us, but we are tying everything to utility accounts, to properties, and what's going on in that property from what we know. And there's limited data there that we have already, and trying to, as Sarah's saying, trying to balance that in with a system that would make sense that we can not only implement out of the gate, but also maintain long-term, is we want to make sure we don't have to do a lot of research on every property all the time to make sure we know what's going on.
So just a quick follow-up. If you're a small business owner operating out of your house, but you use a PO box as your business address, that would basically be somebody that shows up as just a residential person and not a small business owner.
If you're a utility account.
Yeah,
Like I said, so you could have a pretty decent sized business run out of your house, but if you do everything through a PO box, then that's just a residential user.
At this point, yes.
I would note, we classify home-based businesses. I think we have A, B, and C. A is you're an office worker, you're sitting on your couch or at your desk working, you're having no impact on the transportation system, any different than a residence, right? But there are, I think, Class C businesses that we license and regulate that can bring customers into the home and can have signage, right? And can operate at least in limited hours in a neighborhood as a business. And we could take a look at that and see if those businesses might be subject to something a little more.
I encourage you to look at that. I'm sure you'll have a lot more questions from people in the next few months.
Thanks, James.
Clarifying question. I think I heard the number $215 for commercial accounts. Is that per month if it was a
Yeah,
flat fee?
And that would just be a flat, that's if you just took all the non-residential accounts that are in our
Yeah.
system and divide by the 47% of 15 million. Again, what the first thing as the group, we're trying to make sure that we're trying to generate $15 million of revenue through this process. So then we got to figure out how we distribute it. Then we go and look in the system, and if you take all the non-residential accounts divided by that 47%, that's at 215 on average. The information that we will give BDAB is we've already kind of got like the histogram or that bell curve of like, okay, so what are the average accounts? And they range from very small to very large, to thousands of dollars every month. And I think that's some of the information Ben will be using with BDAB and the businesses to try to come up with, well, what is an equitable system when you start to look at how big is the business? What are their utility bills? Are they doubling? Are they only going up 10%? A lot of questions there. And that's why we want to hand it off.
And maybe, Sarah, to help illustrate that, I think we did some calculations on business accounts. So using that average, it would be X% of a total utility bill. I kind of remember that being like, was it 5-6%, something like that?
We know it on the residential side, but on the non-residential, it's a little
harder.
trickier just because of the nuance there. And I know that 215 number, I think when it comes out there, it feels really big. I think that's really more to illustrate if we did kind of the straight division flat fee, but it seems like we're getting some direction to have more of that distribution. So I just want to clarify
Yeah.
that.
No, I think you'll come up with a distribution. You're smart people and you have a lot of data. I'm sure you will. I will just put a plug in for the short-term rental permit holders for folks that have whole house short-term rental permits that are not, on pause. I think they should be treated like a commercial customer. And that is my opinion as a member of a neighborhood association board with a lot of short-term rental permits in the neighborhood.
Yeah, Sarah.
Sarah Odell of the Ben Chamber. So just thanks to Ben and the city for engaging BDAB in this work. I think given it is such a nuanced conversation, I think some of the values may be even different for businesses, whether you're a small business in downtown or whether you're a larger business that relies on a distribution network. So I think separating that out from the really important conversations we're having here around homeowners and residents is really important. Just a couple of considerations, I think, hearing the comments. One would be the degree of, I guess, specificity. I know that the further right you go on the scale, the harder it gets to implement. But from a business standpoint, I'm just reflecting back on the SDC methodology updates that we've done and the categorizations based on the ITE trip data that could be helpful to look at. Just from a predictability standpoint, if you're paying SDCs for transportation and you're in this category, that flows through to the tough as well. And then secondly, I think something for us to grapple around is how do we address the remote work situation? Not so much remote workers that work for companies outside of the state or the region, but people that have hybrid work situations, right? So you may have an office or a commercial account, but only 10 to 15% of your employees may be actually utilizing that office space. And so the impact on the transportation system may be less. So I know that's something at the chamber we're grappling around. How do we quantify what remote and hybrid work looks like? And so just something to consider as we have our work.
Okay, Leslie, I'll come back to you, Joanne. I'm just trying to get to other folks first.
I guess I want clarification on as well on what you just mentioned about that potential flat fee of $215. I guess I'm curious to know if we move more towards like a fluid system of incorporating some of the different considerations, then it's possible that some businesses would pay more than $215, so would pay less, right? With the average being $215.
Correct.
Just because that does seem like a steep number for organizations here that are nonprofits, for that to be collected per month. And I guess I'm just trying to think about like making sure that that fee is in no way kind of passed then to the residential side, because like I said, that number to me, that 215 is a little high. So if we then do move into like the considerations option, then I'm just kind of thinking of the potential negative impacts it can have to different kinds of businesses.
Yeah, and so to just clarify, the idea would be, yes, if you had that kind of more sliding scale that I always think about, you figure out what the type of businesses that we generate traffic, and then you want to add into, is it 1,000 square feet or is it 50,000 square feet? And then do you start charging by that kind of by size? And how can we do that? That's the idea. And again, the 215 was just a representative, just to give some idea of what that would look like. And you can start to think about, well, if we start having a sliding scale, they could range from, less than $100 up to several $100s for some of the larger businesses in town. And that's kind of what we want to give the conversation to BDAB for.
And I guess
Go ahead.
I just want to add to then that example, if you're talking about like the square footage, for the organization I represent, Latino Community Association, we purposely have a big space to provide community members with a safe space to come, either be part of, so we can provide classes, services, we can have our offices there. So then by us thinking of us wanting to have a decent space for community members, now it's impacting us in this way.
Good point.
And just to add, I mean, when we talk $215, that's per commercial account. So if you have one account for a very large building with a number of businesses in there, we estimate we have about 8,000 businesses in town. There's overlap there, right? But I'm thinking of, I don't know if it's still an LCA office, but there's an office on Division. That's one commercial account for probably 15 businesses in that building, Leslie. So
yeah, we're in different locations.
215, that doesn't map onto every business in town potentially paying $215. There's no surprise, much more nuance than that, right?
Yeah, and I think the process that Ben's going to engage in and BDAB is going to engage in is going to result in that wide scale of numbers. So I think we don't have to think of it in that concrete one number. It's going to be much different for each type of business. Okay, Joanne, yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation about businesses, even for us that are not business owners. Because there is a component, a moral component that I feel businesses have a responsibility to the community. We're giving them wealth, and I think it's important that we have collective conversations. So on that note, two businesses come to mind off of Greenwood Avenue. One is a small repair shop where a gentleman repairs string instruments. You know, his revenue, his money coming in is not very high, I assume. And in that same road, you know, a little bit down the road, there's a big office of attorneys. Their intake is going to varied, and they may have the same amount of trips. That's why I think that it's important that we look at what is the money flowing in our community. Second, regarding nonprofits organizations for the service development charge, I suggested that we exempt nonprofit organizations, and I want to add a caveat to that. We should think of nonprofits organizations that are furthering the mission or the values of the city, and support those. One of the ideas that come to mind is the priority populations that the Human Rights and Equity Commission have put together, like a list of folks that are underserved in our community. If a nonprofit organization has that audience as their target audience, then I think that work, it's helping further the work of the city. And so it should be treated differently than, you know, some for-profit entity. Thank you.
Other thoughts? Anyone who hasn't spoken on this yet? Mark, do you want to weigh in?
Thanks. Just to state the somewhat obvious, a reminder that this is with the utility mechanism, this is really the only way to tap into visitor revenue, direct or indirect visitor revenue, and that there are going to be business categories that are more and less likely to have a direct or indirect nexus to visitors to the region.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a consideration we've heard a lot. Gina, yeah.
Quick comment about, you know, in the spirit of the placing the fee on residential customers fairly evenly with an exception for lower income community members. I would encourage you to not come up with too many categories for businesses because really everyone needs to chip in, right? So so I know you'll do a great job at it, but it does seem to me it's like the idea of a flat fee for everybody is kind of interesting. It's like everybody kind of needs to chip in. So
yeah, I think that's the key thing that we've heard is we want to find that balance of making it granular enough that we're not lumping people into too big of categories, but not so granular that it's very difficult to implement and people get confused and don't understand what they're supposed to be paying. So yeah. Okay, well, we are about at our end of time here. So I want to thank everybody again for participating. Sarah, I think we have a reminder slide of our next meeting, which is, oh wait, we were going to do this, weren't we?
Yeah,
We did want to highlight, I'll just do this real quick, Sarah. This is our webpage, which many of you probably have already looked at. Since we're kind of out of time today, I would love if you would take a look at our webpage, take a look at the facts, the FAQs we have there. Let us know if there's some big question you're hearing a lot that we've missed that we could put on the webpage to help get that out to people, or any other feedback you have about this information. This is the first stop for information about this that we can send people to, and it's cut off there. So it's bendoregon.gov/transportation-fee is where you go and find that. And we would love to have your input on that. You can email it, or we can do a quick check-in next meeting on that as well. And then, yeah, our next meeting is the 11th. We'll have more of a conversation around equity and hopefully have maybe a check-in on how that BDAB process is going. Also talking about accountability. So how we make sure this funding is spent on the things all the values we've talked about today. And then a little bit of that conversation of, you know, what are the other funding tools we want to keep exploring to help pay for our transportation system. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Really
everybody.
appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.
Would it be the same time?
Are we same time on the 11th? We think
Yes,
morning time?
same Wednesday, October 11th, 9:30 to noon. I'll send out a calendar invite and we're meeting in this room. So
Back
we
in
won't
this room.
change venues.
Great.